Chapter 779 Preparing for a Sea Trip. Deng Yuanbo explained their means to Zhang Yi. If it was a low-level inhuman, the method to raise their strength was very simple, which was to help them replenish their inhuman energy origin. Although it could not allow them to break through their genetic limitations and come to a higher level of alien energy, it could also allow them to reach the upper limit of the level they were currently at. And since Uncle Yu, Fatty Sue and the others didn't have high levels of alien energy, it wasn't too difficult to raise their strength. In order to befriend Zhang Yi, Deng Yuanbo expressed his willingness to do Zhang Yi this favor. Zhang Yi knew in his heart that this friendship would definitely require him to repay it in some other way in the future. Still, he readily agreed. In addition, Deng Yuanbo also told Zhang Yi how to use the compound axe that he had sent him earlier. It was no longer very useful to Zhang Yi nowadays, but it could be used directly on Uncle Yu. He has a strong self-healing ability and can withstand the ravages of transforming his flesh. Deng Yuanbo said with a bad smile. Zhang Yi could not help but feel a vicious chill in his heart. If he had resisted the temptation to use it in the first place, he was afraid that he would need to undergo some flesh and blood pain as well. After bidding farewell to Deng Yuanbo and Deng Shintong, Zhang Yi took Yang Xinxin and Huahua with him and left Blizzard City. When he was leaving, the members of the Tengu squad all came over to see him off. Except for Bai Li Changqing, who didn't come because he needed to heal from his heavy injuries, everyone else was there. "Captain, when will you be back?" Yi couldn't help but inquire with worry. As soon as Zhang Yi left, he would be in Tianhai City from now on, listening to the tone but not the announcement. He wasn't like the other captains who would obediently listen to the orders of the higher-ups. In the future, if Zhu Jing was trying to get him to do something, he would have to be pacified and discuss with him. This also meant that Tengu squad might not have too many missions in the future. Zhang Yi glanced at Yi He with Luing Hao and Xue Miao and said with a faint smile, "Now that Deng Shintong is back, you guys should also return to your own teams. I will speak to Commander Zhu's side about this matter." But Yi He said, "I don't want to go back. Boss, I want to follow you." Xue Miao and Luing Hao also expressed the same attitude without hesitation. "Me too." After seeing Zhang Yi's strength, they were naturally unwilling to miss this opportunity to hug their thighs. Zhang Yi thought for a moment and said indifferently, "Do as you guys like. Stay if you guys love to stay." He was a loose person by nature and wouldn't have much time to manage them in the future. This Tengu squad, they were free to come and go, Zhang Yi would never restrain them. Anyway, the next mission was not even known to be a monkey's age. Soon, Zhang Yi took the Blizzard City special train back to Tianhai City. Walking out of the Little Temple Mountain subway station, looking at the snow-covered world in front of him and breathing in the cold air, Zhang Yi's mood was incredibly comfortable. "Finally, I can take a good rest for a while." He lamented so. Ever since the eclipse moon landed, the entire Jiangnan region had been stirred up. Not only did it involve the Ronin from outside the country, the most troublesome thing was the internal problems within Blizzard City. Zhang Yi had been passively involved in it and was in constant trouble. It was also time to enjoy the good life. Zhang Yi and Yang Xinxin returned home and were immediately welcomed eagerly by everyone. Zhou Kuo and Yang Xia excitedly pounced over and gave Zhang Yi a passionate and full bear hug. "Zhang Yi, you're finally back. Now you can stay at home properly, right? These 2 months have been really hard on you." Yang Xia came close to Zhang Yi's ear and said in a warm tone while spitting, "Was it dinner first, or a bath first, or me?" Zhang Yi sighed helplessly. "I just came back, so I want to have a good rest." Yang Xia's face was a bit lost. Zhang Yi took off his jacket and threw it to Zhou Kuo. "I'm going to take a shower first. Who's going to help me rub my back?" Yang Xia's eyes lit up as she suddenly thought that when she had just met Zhang Yi, she was also in the bathroom. So, a certain duo went to help Zhang Yi rub his back. A long time later, the night was already deep. Today, it was rare that it did not continue to snow, and the sky unexpectedly appeared a touch clean, and the stars could be seen vaguely. Zhang Yi was lying on the bed with his hands behind his head, slowly pondering over everything that had happened in the past half a year or so since the end of this world. For half a year, everything was like a dream. He and everyone around him were running hard to stay alive. Yet this feeling didn't make him sick of it. At the very least, his life was getting better and better, unlike in the past when he was working and muddling through each day. Perhaps, everyone's heart is looking forward to the end of days. Zhang mumbled and read. These were the words of one of his very favorite authors, Haruki Murakami, in his work 1Q84. Zhang had always loved it very much. Zhou Qir's hand was placed on his chest. The hand that had performed the surgery was very delicate, white and slender, and the nails were a light pink color. Why did you suddenly start lamenting about this? She asked with a smile. On the other side, Yang Xia muttered, I guess you must be tired. Take a good rest for a while. She looked at the side of Zhang Yi's face and reached out to caress it with some heartache. Don't think about anything, it's good enough just like this. We are together and living happily. With regards to the end times, they had long since detached themselves from the initial panic. Nowadays, everyone was living in the middle of such a post-apocalyptic fortress. Living a life with no worries about food and clothing. There was no need to be as busy as in the past, in order to make a living. Yang Xia didn't need to disguise herself as a flawless goddess in front of people. Zhou Qir didn't need to beg for leadership for the sake of her position, not to mention having to be busy doing surgeries every day. Everyone was doing what they loved to do, something that was unimaginable in the past. Zhang Yi looked at Zhou Qir and then at Yang Xia, suddenly wanting to go out for a while. They needed to relax too much. Of course, there were many ways to relax, except that once in a while, they needed to relax their spirits, not just their bodies as they were doing now. After a while, let's go out for a cruise. Qinjingguan's side has large icebreakers, so we'll only swim in the offshore area, fishing and whatnot. When the two women heard this, their eyes lit up with excitement. Really? Zhang Yi nodded. Of course it was true, it's not like there's anything to swim around on land. Going out to see the ice ocean scenery is also very good. When the time came, he would go to find Qinjingguan by the way and ask him to consolidate the sea defense properly. Within the Jiangnan region's domain, the coastline wasn't too long, there were only 5 cities, and Tianhai City was the most prosperous. With Kingdom of Huashu's strength, plus the deterrent effect of the total annihilation of the Eclipse and Tianlong pirates' fleets this time around, it was unlikely that any unscrupulous offshore organizations would come to commit crimes. But it was better to be born in fear and die in peace, so it was better to take precautions before it happened. He had asked for quite a few heavy weapons for sea defense from Zhu Zheng's side. Chapter 780 Mysteries of the Deep Sea. The next day, Zhang Yi slept until 10 o'clock in the morning before getting up. Zhou Qir and Yang Xia were more tired yesterday, so they had yet to wake up. He wore his pajamas and lazily shuffled downstairs with his slippers after washing up. Inside the living room, the sound of video games could be heard, and Zhang Yi probed from the stairs to see Fatty Sue rubbing the joystick with 2 dark circles under his eyes. You're not afraid of sudden death like this? Zhang Yi asked as he leaned over the railing. Fatty Sue was startled when he heard Zhang Yi's voice and soon let out a pig-killing squeal. Ah ah ah. Dead again, dead again. Zhang Yi walked over to see that Fatty Sue was playing the soul's game of self-mutilation again. Go make me a cup of coffee. Zhang Yi kicked him and then sat on his butt on the soft sofa. Fatty Sue could only honestly go over and make coffee for Zhang Yi. Not long after, the rest of the family also appeared over in the living room one after another. Liang Yu got up the earliest, and by the time Zhang Yi woke up, she had already finished her rehabilitation exercises. Because she was a reinforced inhuman, her self-healing ability was relatively strong, and she had Zhou Qir to pick up her bones, so Liang Yu got well very quickly. After everyone arrived, Zhang Yi talked about his future plans. The first one was the matter of letting them go to Blizzard City and undergo Deng Group's remodeling. Regarding this, Uncle Yu was naturally very eager. He desperately wished to make himself stronger, and then he could play a part in the team. Fatty Sue, however, was a bit scared, afraid that he would be turned into a monster by Teng's technology. Will they cut off my arm and install a mechanical prosthetic limb? It's just like the cyberpunk game. Maybe even put a chip in my brain. Oh. Fatty Sue got chills all over his body just thinking about it. Zhang Yi gave him a blank look without any good humor. That was a robot you were talking about. How can today's robots be as good as Inhumans? The mechanical technology in 2051 was not yet developed to that extent. Robots were prone to malfunctioning in the midst of a super cold environment, and their endurance was not strong enough. To put it bluntly, this was a time of great mutation, and the Inhumans, in many fields, had demonstrated a stronger ability than contemporary technology. However, science and technology was also developing, and perhaps in the near future, the combination of science and technology and alien energy would give birth to even brighter sparks. When Yang Xia heard this, she asked curiously, "Then do I need to go as well?" After all, my ability was auxiliary. Hee. Zhang Yi smiled and pinched her small white hand as his gaze fell on the endless snowy plain. You won't have to go. Deng Group's transformation experiments were simple and rough, and ordinary people simply couldn't withstand them. Shou Qir, along with Yang Xia and Yang Xinxin, were not within Zhang Yi's consideration. What's more, their abilities were all special. Zhang Yi would not let the Deng Group have the opportunity to study them. The final result of the negotiation was for Uncle Yu and Fatty Sue to go to Blizzard City and receive experiments as well as professional training from the Deng Group. Zhang Yi, on the other hand, took the women at home to Chaoyu Seaport. 1. To help Qin Jingguan set up his defense, and 2. To get an icebreaker to go out for a cruise. Uncle Yu didn't have any opinions, and although Fatty Sue muttered that he also wanted to go out to play, his opinion was directly dismissed by Zhang Yi. You go to Blizzard City, I'll turn around and ask the Deng family to arrange a few young and pretty little girls as escorts for you. Zhang Yi's statement caused Fatty Sue's eyes to light up and he nodded his head as if pounding garlic and agreed to the matter. And so these two things were happily decided. Everyone played painfully together for 2 more days before Zhang Yi sent Fatty Sue and Uncle Yu on the special train to Blizzard City. On the other hand, he was bringing the ladies of his family to the Chaoyu Seaport. After a big battle last time, this place was also battered with holes. The entire harbor was mostly abandoned, and many containers turned into pieces of iron and flew everywhere. Luckily, the underground shelters were not affected and the people here could still live well. When Zhang Yi and the others came over by snowmobile, thousands of people on this side of the harbor were busy cleaning up the battlefield. Qin Jingguan led the people and came over to receive Zhang Yi. Chief, you're here. Qin Jingguan saw the women behind Zhang Yi at a glance. It had been half a year and it was rare for them to come out for a trip, so they all brought out their best outfits. One by one, they wore all the most beautiful furs, and the makeup on their faces was so exquisite that it was almost like they were going to choose Miss World. This kind of exquisite dressing made the women of Chaoyu Base envious. I came over to take a look at your side. By the way, I begged for a few skilled crew members and that icebreaker. I plan to go out to sea for a few days. Hearing that Zhang Yi wanted to go out to sea, Qin Jingguan's expression immediately became hesitant. Boss, if you're going to go out to sea, I have a sentence that I don't know if I should say or not. Zhang Yi raised his eyebrows. What is it? Qin Jingguan said, it's fine if you just swim around the near sea, but I wouldn't recommend you to enter the deep sea area. It's because the oceans nowadays are more terrifying than the land. Zhang Yi narrowed his eyes. You were saying, mutated creatures? The planet's oceans accounted for 70%, and the land only accounted for 30%. Moreover, the ocean was a vertical space, and the types of creatures in it had not been clarified by humans so far. With the advent of the Great Mutation era, there was no telling what strange and bizarre foreign beasts had appeared among the oceans. When sailing out to sea, there was a possibility of encountering them. Zhang Yi asked curiously, have you guys encountered any before when you went out to sea? Qin Jingguan nodded honestly. Encountered them. And have lost 2 ships. There are great terrors in the middle of the ocean, those sea monsters that are gigantic after mutation can easily topple a huge steel ship of tens of thousands of tons. Later on, when we sailed, we had to avoid the sea where the monsters were. That's why I'm telling you this, was hoping that you can be careful. Zhang Yi's heart could not help but think of Kanuta, the captain of the 4th team of the Tianlong pirates. His ability was to transform into a giant blue shark. If their battlefield was not on land but on the sea in the first place, I'm afraid that the members of the Tengu squad wouldn't have been able to tackle him so easily. I see, won't I just avoid the deep sea? Right now, as long as he didn't encounter a particularly powerful foreign beast, he would still be able to deal with it with his abilities. Chen Jingko nodded, then I'll make arrangements for you right away. Zhang Yi said, there's no rush on this for now, first show me your sea defense. The last battle was a lesson, you didn't even have the slightest way to counterattack in the face of an enemy coming from the sea. This should never happen again in the future. Chen Jingguan scratched his head, his face a little odd. He thought to himself, if not for too many people being killed off by you, we might not be unable to defend ourselves against the pirates now. Zhang Yi had commanded, so Chen Jingguan naturally did as he was told. So he acted like a tour guide and led Zhang Yi and the women of the shelter around along the seashore. Zhang Yi was watching very carefully checking the gaps and making sure that there would be no problems with the sea defense. However, Zhou Court and her warbling girls were happy, not caring in the slightest about Zhang Yi's business there. One by one, they took their cameras and took selfies on the seashore to the huge frozen sea. Under the grayish-white sky, the huge sea surface was frozen into a piece. This kind of picture was very shocking. Chapter 781 Sea Monster. After Zhang Yi looked around, he said to Chen Jingguan, sea defense must be done well. There basically won't be any enemies on land in the future, so we have to beware of enemies on the sea. Chen Jingguan scratched his head, but our armed forces were basically depleted last time. And it's not very sufficient in terms of manpower. Zhang Yi said indifferently, you don't have to worry about that, I've already asked Blizzard City for a batch of weapons. He and Chen Jingguan returned to the refuge, then directly placed that large batch of weapons inside the weapons depot. There were more than 20 huge sea defense cannons, as well as plenty of weapons and ammunition, and a lot of other heavy firearms as well. With these weapons in place, any enemy ships that appeared within 30 kilometers of the coastline could be stopped. Chen Jingguan was overjoyed to see these weapons and promised on the spot that he would arrange for them to be set up and train his soldiers to operate them. Subsequently, Zhang Yi also got the icebreaker he wanted. Chen Jingguan gave him a few veteran sailors, and Zhang Yi left Tianhai City with the women of his family and cruised around the offshore area. Zhang Yi was very cautious and would not go near deep water areas. The ship was sailing along the edge of the ice in the offshore area, so everyone could look at the seascape and experience the fun of sea fishing in the meantime. Although it didn't go too far, this look was considered a long trip compared to the past, so every face was filled with smiles. Zhang Yi's space was full of fishing gear. Everyone was wearing cold-proof clothes, on the deck against the bone-chilling wind, trying to use frozen fish as bait and put it into the sea to catch big fish. Each person had a fishing rod, and at first they were all excited. But after an hour, there was not a single person who caught a fish. Not to mention catching a fish, not even a bite happened. What was that? Did all the offshore fish freeze to death as well? Zhang Yi rubbed his chin in disbelief. Liang Yu was even more frustrated as he looked at his hands and muttered, these hands of mine, they were also the ones that had picked up 100 pounds of big knives and slapped the lapis lazuli boards. How come I can't even catch a fish? The old sailor who accompanied the boat was named Tian Shi, and people called him Old Tian, who was a bearded brash man in his 40s. Seeing this scene, he laughed and came over to explain. Mr. Zhang, you don't know anything about this, do you? The water temperature on the surface is too low, and the fish are swimming downwards. Zhang Yi leaned on the railing and asked with a smile, doesn't that mean that if you want to catch big fish, you can only go to the deep sea area? Old Tian said, fishing is indeed a bit difficult, and all of our fishing was done with trawls. However, the deep sea area is not recommended for you to go there. Zhang Yi kindly laughed. Don't worry about it, to me, the most meaningful thing is the scenery at this moment. He turned his head to the side. Zhou Ke and Yang Xinxin were holding fishing rods in their hands, looking intently at the water surface of the floating broken ice. Even though the cold wind was piercing their bones and their little faces were red, they could not stop their enthusiasm for fishing. This peaceful scene was enough to make Zhang Yi feel satisfied. Old Tian nodded, inwardly relieved. However, he also murmured, even though offshore fishing is a bit more difficult, it's still a bit strange that not a single fish has taken the bait for so long. Everyone failed to notice that just as their big boat was resting quietly in the sea, a huge shadow slowly floated up from underwater. Liang Yu was the first to notice that something was wrong. How did the water surface turn dark? She glanced downwards, and then her pupils immediately shrunk. There's something under the water. Liang Yu's voice was very urgent, which immediately caught the attention of Zhang Yi and Tian Shi. Zhang Yi turned around and also discovered the huge black shadow under the water. Its size was so large that Zhang Yi could not help but be taken aback. The length of the Prosperity was 62 meters, and that underwater shadow hadn't even fully surfaced yet, and it was actually almost half the size of the ship's hull. Old Tian shouted in fear, "No good, it was a mutated sea beast." The women who were fishing also screamed in fear, and then they coincidentally took the same approach, flocking to Zhang Yi's side to seek protection. Only Liang Yu was more calm. Although she was also greatly shocked, her first thought was not to yell and scream, but to solve the problem at hand. Old Tian and the crew had already begun to anxiously make preparations. Encountering this kind of giant sea beast, all they could do was to stabilize their bodies to avoid being thrown out, and then all that was left was to pray. Everyone go back inside the cabin immediately and tie themselves up. Quickly, it has to be quick. Zhang Yi, on the other hand, ignored old Tian's words. His right hand was placed on top of the railing. First, use the ability to levitate the icebreaker's entirety. A hazy white light appeared on the hull of the icebreaker, and although it was still on the surface of the water, it was pulled by another force that lifted it up. Clatter! The entire hull of the ship was detached from the surface of the water, and it was just silently suspended on the surface of the sea. And then it was the Two Realms Extinction Knot. Zhang Yi's right eye flashed with a brilliant light, and in an instant, a huge spherical space wrapped the entire ship. The ship no longer swayed, and it was smooth as if it was resting on land. This was. Old Tian was taken aback as he looked out, only to realize that the entire ship was already flying in midair. The sea was surrounded by rough waves, yet it wouldn't affect the ship in the slightest. A miracle! This was a miracle! Old Tian and the crew stared at their boss with jaws agape and stupefied gazes. Although they had heard of Zhang Yi's power, they also knew that supernormal abilities were indeed capable of doing things that ordinary people could not comprehend. However, the scene that was happening in front of them was just too unbelievable. Zhang Yi jumped onto the railing, overlooking the huge and deep sea below. Suddenly, he saw a huge ice blue eye staring at him dead on from beneath the surface of the sea. This was followed by 3, 5, 10, countless strange eyes appearing on the monster's body. Was this a mutated sea beast? An impulse suddenly arose in Zhang Yi's heart. He wanted to catch this sea beast and study it. A huge roar came from beneath the surface of the sea, and the sound was distant as if it came from a faraway place, like the old yellow cow in the village. Zhang Yi drew out the sacred ruler in his right hand, and the black dark matter wrapped around it like a flame. At this moment, the sea beast also violently rushed out from under the water surface, setting off 10,000 waves. If Zhang Yi hadn't shielded the ship in time, this impact could have smashed a deep crater in the side of the icebreaker. Void Chop! Zhang Yi aimed a slash at the bottom and dark matter gushed out from the blade, as if he had drawn a thick and colorful brushstroke at the place where the sky and the sea intersected. Nowadays, Zhang Yi's mastery of the power of the void was becoming more and more skillful, and he could condense his majestic power into a single point and launch a targeted attack. The sea monster rushed towards the hull of the ship, but it did not realize that it would never be able to touch the large ship in front of it. However, its body was like butter touching a hot knife, it was directly split from the center. Blood splashed out like rain, coloring the entire surface of the sea. Rumble. Its huge body split into two halves and smashed into the sea, and another huge wave of blood color surged up. Chapter 782 A Time of Contentment. The huge sea beast's corpse floated on the surface of the sea, and blood dyed a large area of the sea red. It did not take long before a shark smelled the blood and swam over from the distance, its black dorsal fins swimming on the surface of the water. Only then did Zhang Yi control the boat to fall. Wow! Water splashed everywhere. The crew members were all shocked by Zhang Yi's ability, calling out miracle under their breath. Yang Xinxin wrapped her arms around Zhang Yi and cried out in admiration, "Brother, you're so great!" Although the others were shocked, they didn't panic too much because they all believed in Zhang Yi's strength. The crowd came to the front of the ship to take a look before they saw clearly what the sea monster was. It turned out to be a mutated whale. However, at this time, its head was full of densely packed eyes, and there were many lumpy bumps on its body, and its size was even much larger than the largest blue whale it once was. It was already unrecognizable what species it was in the first place. A feast had already begun below, carnivorous fish frantically snatching its corpse as waves of blood rolled over it. Although it looks a bit bigger, it wasn't that scary. Yang Xia said with a smile as she covered her full chest. "No, this thing is awesome." Zhang Yi, however, dismissed her claim. "If it hadn't met me, this thing could have overturned a steel ship weighing thousands of tons. Its power underwater is terrifying, and if calculated by inhuman standards, its destructive power is able to reach the delta level." Liang Yu's eyes lit up as she suddenly picked up the boom on the ground before throwing it down towards the water. "Now, I don't believe I can't catch a fish." The crowd was also suddenly enlightened. After this sea monster was killed, it would definitely attract fish. So everyone followed suit and rushed over to fish. Zhang Yi, however, noticed that old Tian was leaning on the railing, frowning as he pondered something. He walked over and asked with his hands in his pockets, "What's wrong? What's the problem?" Seeing Zhang Yi come to ask, old Tian hurriedly replied, "Mr. Zhang Yi, I just feel something strange." "Where is it strange? Tell me in detail." Old Tian pointed at the corpse of the sea monster below and said in a deep voice, "According to common sense, sea monsters of this size were active in the deep sea area, and would normally not come to the offshore. This is because it is difficult for it to obtain sufficient food in such places. That's why I think it's very strange to meet it here." Zhang Yi did not know the sea very well and asked curiously, "Then tell me, what could this be because of?" Old Tian spoke slowly, "There are times when if there is bad weather, or the eruption of an underwater volcano, or an underwater earthquake, there were deep-sea fish that would run to the offshore to take refuge. Then again, it was when they encountered a natural enemy." A cautious glint flashed across Zhang Yi's eyes. Natural enemies? Did a sea monster of such a huge size also have natural enemies? His gaze could not help but look in the direction of the deep sea. The ocean was so vast and deep that even before the end of the world, there were many unknown and terrifying creatures in it. Not to mention the coming of the Great Mutation era. It was better to have less contact. Zhang Yi lamented so. Originally, he had planned to collect that huge sea monster and make it into food for some fresh food. But when he saw its strange appearance, he could not help but feel a little diarrhea in his heart. So he simply let it return to the sea, and in the meantime, helped them build a nest to facilitate the crowd's fishing. Sure enough, with this huge bait, the back of the fishing is much easier. The fish catch was a great harvest. However, Zhang Yi told them that these fish could not be eaten, so they should either be released or kept for fun. In the following days, Zhang Yi's life was very leisurely. Although the establishment of Tengu Squad was retained, Zhang Yi listened to the tone but not the announcement, and Zhu Jing didn't dare to delegate tasks to him easily in order to draw him in. After Uncle Yu and Fatty Sue went on a trip to the Deng group, they both came back with noticeable changes. Uncle Yu's power had been drastically enhanced. They had also received specialized combat training, and their combat literacy had been greatly improved. The person with the most obvious changes was Fatty Sue. He had lost a lot of weight, and it would not be an exaggeration to describe him as withered, and it was rumored that the training he had received from the professional soldiers there had made life worse than death for him. But the real reason, well, Zhang Yi had a number in his heart. Later on, Fatty Sue had been pining for Blizzard City, always looking for Zhang Yi and asking to go back to take a look. Zhang Yi is also good to his brother, mentioned to Deng Shintong, directly help Fatty Sue in Blizzard City to get a small house. He even gave him a long-term public transportation card so that he could go to Blizzard City often to relieve his stress. All in all, although the price the duo paid was a heavy one, the gains were also particularly remarkable. However, it was proven that a person who had temporarily lost weight through exercise wanted to bounce back with particular ease. After returning to the shelter, Fatty Sue cried out and started eating with a vengeance, and within half a month, he regained his size again and even became fatter. And Zhang Yi? He enjoyed a comfortable life on weekdays while playing cards with Zhoukur, Yang Xia and Yang Xinxin and the girls, playing wild boxing and whatnot. However, he would also set aside 2 hours every day to learn martial arts with Liang Yu. In terms of close combat, he did still have flaws. The increase in strength made him realize that none of the high-level Inhumans were comprehensively improving their strength. The barrel effect determined that the lower limit of strength was the shortcoming of the Inhuman. If there was a fatal flaw in any aspect, it was likely that they would be killed in seconds in battle. Fortunately, Zhang Yi's years of experience working in the warehouse, coupled with his diligent exercise, had given him good physical fitness. As the days passed, he also kept up with Liang Yu's level of training. It was only that martial arts was a watered-down effort that was built up over time, and it was impossible to achieve it overnight. Zhang Yi was sometimes impatient and asked Liang Yu, "Is there any quick fix?" Liang Yu rolled her eyes. "Yes, it's called the Sunflower Treasure Classic." Zhang Yi hemmed and hawed. I was more inclined towards the Taoist method of yin-yang reconciliation. What he got in return was naturally a flurry of iron fists from Liang Yu. Zhang Yi hurriedly explained, "Actually, I was just making a suggestion. It doesn't matter if it works or not, we just want to experience the process." Right in the middle of this environment, Zhang Yi's close combat ability was also improving. Liang Yu had specially formulated a training program for Zhang Yi. If you wanted to get quick results, there was also a way to use defense as offense. The sacred ruler was a horizontal sword, and it was very convenient to move and block. As long as he was helped to block close assaults, and then pull away with his spatial shuttling ability, Zhang Yi would be able to utilize the advantages of his abilities whether he used Thunder Execution and White Lord Shot or Void Slash. Just like this, 2 months had passed without realizing it, and it came to July. The hottest season of the year, the planet also came to perihelion, and the temperature in Tianhai City was once as high as 30 degrees below zero. At this time, we moved our eyes slightly away from Tianhai City and came to the Southern Ocean waters thousands of nautical miles away. Here was an island called Rockflow Island. The island was formed by a volcanic eruption under the sea and possessed abundant geothermal energy. In the past, this was a famous tourist destination. And after the end times came, people from many surrounding countries fled here.